So I want to talk today, now in this session, about the way we view the world. Okay, so it's the concept of worldview. And I want to answer the question, what happens or how an earthquake actually shakes a person's worldview? So I want you to think for a few minutes about what happens in an earthquake, because an earthquake actually literally shakes the ground on which we stand. It's a very disturbing feeling. I have never been in an actual earthquake. I've felt some, what would it be described as tremors, but I've never been in an actual earthquake. So you are much more experienced than I am because you've been through one. But I was in Marrakesh 2 years ago, just the day after a major earthquake struck Marrakesh. But what happened in the earthquake was that the epicenter of the earthquake was not in Marrakesh itself, it was high in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, which is at the north of Africa. And the earthquake struck after midnight, and everyone was in their houses and in their beds. And all of the houses in the Atlas Mountains are made out of mud brick, including the roofs. The ceilings were made of mud brick as well. They were supported on wooden frames, but then they had mud bricks. And unfortunately, what happened when the earthquake struck, all of the roofs collapsed and everyone was in bed. And so unfortunately, they had thousands of people who were killed. If that earthquake had hit during the day, it would not have been there would not have been as many people's lives lost. Now, I know that it was a very, very traumatic situation here on the 17th of December. I know that we could in one sense say, oh, it could have been worse because it could have happened at night, it could have happened outside of school holidays. There's lots of things that people are saying. That doesn't change the fact that it was a very, very challenging time, and I want to be really careful not to change that or say that it's a good thing that it happened. But I do want to just get you to think about why an earthquake is so disturbing for a moment. We expect certain things in life. We view the world in certain ways, and we get used to just getting used to that. So a simple illustration might be a chair. When you see a chair, you expect that chair is going to be able to hold you when you sit down. So I don't know what your sense of humour is like, but if you've ever seen someone who goes to sit on a chair and that chair collapses, can you be honest with me? Do anyone here laugh just a little bit inside when you see that happen? Because that's actually a function of worldview. Okay, you expect the chair to hold somebody. When you sit on a chair and it breaks, that's a shattering of a worldview. It's one of the simple things we want to establish today. But what I want to talk to you about is, what is worldview? Why is it important? And what can we do to deal with the situation if our worldview does get shattered? So I want to introduce someone to you today. I've got a friend here, okay, and it's a little bear brought from Sydney to be able to give to one of the kids somewhere. And I want you to just have a look at this bear. It's dressed up in a care flight uniform, okay? And I want us to imagine, just for a second, try to think about this bear as if it was alive and it had a personality and a history. Okay, so I want to. Oh, sorry, he's also got a bump on his head. I want to think about this bear, and I want to think about the worldview of this bear. So this bear is dressed as a helicopter pilot. So this bear's a professional. This bear's obviously done some study. You don't just get to jump in a cockpit of a helicopter without having done some study. So we might say his worldview is a professional. He's in a job that's pretty important. The Care Flight Ambulance in Australia is about delivering paramedics to locations or delivering sick kids to hospital. It's about getting people safe. And so there's a certain attitude in this bear about service. There's some good things that make up what this bear has going for it. But this bear also has a history. I want you to imagine this bear had a family. Now, this bear had a family of, it had parents, and the parents, depending on what the parents were like, would influence what the bear was like. But imagine that this bear was actually an orphan, lost its parents at an early age. That could change the way this bear acted. And even though you looked at that bear, you might not be able to see that that was a difference. We've said already that this bear might be educated, makes a difference in how people present and how people respond. What about the spiritual beliefs of this bear? What about the family connections that this bear has? What about where it grew up? What about the language it speaks? The language, the culture, all of that sort of experience actually impacts upon the way this bear views the world. And I'm using a bear because I didn't want to pull somebody out and use them as an illustration. But I want you to imagine that this bear responds to its world based on everything that has happened to it and everything that has been layered upon it that has become the message that the individual actually understands. And just look at the person next to you for a second. You don't have to say anything. Just look at them, then look away. And just recognise that they are a different person to you. They have a different set of items and values and various experiences that make them an individual that has a way of looking at the world. One of the difficult things for our bear, and also for me, is that I can fall into the very easy mistake of thinking that the way I view the world is the right way, and the way that if anyone is different to me, then they're wrong. So I am a certain type of person, a white, Anglo-Saxon male. I'm 60 years old. I come from Australia. I was born in London. I grew up in a very, very stable home. I had parents who were married for 65 years before they died recently. I had one brother. I had good friendship. I had a good education. I had a stable family. I became a Christian when I was 14 years old. I felt a call of God to ministry when I was 15 years old. I've been a pastor since I was 22. I pioneered my first church at 26. I've had a lot of good things happen. I've got 4 kids who are all doing really well. I've got 3 grandchildren and 1 just about to be born in the next few weeks. Things are good. That's the way I view the world. That's all impacted upon the way I view the world. I have a construct. I have an understanding that is my world, but it is different to your world. Yours is not wrong. Mine is not right. We just have a different viewpoint. And when we come to understand an earthquake and the impact of an earthquake upon individuals, it's important to recognise that each person is going to experience it different ways based on what they have happening in their world. So when you actually think about this, every individual on earth is different from each other, not only in looks and fingerprints, but also in the way we see and experience life. each of us has our unique view of the world and our expectations on what the world should be, especially our part in the world. So this worldview takes a number of forms, and us, as people who want to care pastorally for people, we need to understand people's worldviews in terms of recognising the journey that they are on. Their view of the world needs to be respected. And so if we're actually going to help people, we need to be respectful of where they're coming from. If we're going to help Mr. Bear, we need to be aware of what he might need and what might work in his situation. And the variation actually makes life exciting. And one of the things I've really found in disaster ministry and disaster support is if I am willing to find out where the person is from and what's happening in their world, I am likely to be able to help them better. Because I can make all the wrong sort of actions and the wrong sort of assumptions if I just do what I think I need. So it's very much about them. And so I want us to think about that. So I want us to think about what makes up our worldview. So there's 4 things on the screen here that make up our worldview. And each of these impact us differently. And it's important for us to understand this. So the first one, we'll start at the top, are our beliefs. So what do we believe? They may be our spiritual beliefs, they may be our attitudinal beliefs. They're things we just expect to take place. The things we think will happen, or the things that should happen, the things we believe are vitally important. So things like we might believe that, we might have a belief that says life is good and life is positive. And so we can expect good things. But someone else might have a belief that life is bad and life is full of problems and trials because of their experience. And so that is an inherent belief difference that can actually be significant. Someone might be a deeply Christian or a deeply spiritual person, and that's going to colour their beliefs, that's going to colour and influence their belief system, and so that is going to dictate their worldview. But another person might be a person who does not have spiritual faith or views themselves as an atheist or someone who does not believe in the concept or the existence of God, and that is going to colour their thinking and their belief system. And regardless of where you sit on that scale, if you're trying to help someone, it's important to recognise that their belief system is their belief system that's valid. And while we may want to challenge that, we may want to discuss that with them at some point, in the midst of a disaster, that's not the time to do that. We're not trying to change people, we're trying to help. So that's our beliefs. But then we also have our values, the things we hold which are important. So in every country, in every culture, there are different values. In every family, there are different values. Some people really value, say, the issue of truth and honesty, and that's really held very, very strongly. And they say that you should always tell the truth and you should always do the right thing regardless of how difficult life can get. But not everyone has that value. Some people have the value of opportunism, where they will be honest while it suits them, but they will be dishonest when they think that's going to help them better. And that is very much part of their values. It's part of the way they view the world. And again, I'm not arguing as to whether that's right or wrong. I'm simply saying people view the world differently, and it's important to recognise that. So our values, what we think about family, what we think about sexuality, what we think about interaction with people, how we treat people, how we respond in challenging situations are all determined and become part of our value system. But then on top of that, we have institutions. And institutions are not just groups that we're employed by or part of, but they're conventions of belief and there are thought patterns of belief which actually impact our expectations. So an institution might be your Christian faith or your Christianity in some way, how it impacts you in every way. It might be that your political beliefs, your affiliation with one way of thinking that the government should be going in a certain direction. It could be your culture, and we'll come back to customs in a minute, but it could be because you are from a certain island and you think a certain way, that could be an institution that you are part of, and that could be very important. The fourth one is customs. And this is about the customs of your family, the customs of your people group, the customs of the organisations or the groups that you are a part of. So I'm exposed to many different customs. I have the customs of Australian culture. Now, Australian culture is a very broad concept. We have multiple variations. We have a saying in Australia that something, if we don't like something, often people will say, "Oh, that's Australian." I always laugh when they say that because Australia is so varied that it's hard to define what is Australian culture and what is not Australian culture. And I think we need to be aware that things change depending on where you're at. Now, all of this is interesting, and it's a little bit of an exercise in our intellect until we start to realise that when somebody gets under pressure, especially in a disaster setting, that their worldview is actually under threat. And why is that important? Because your worldview is how you decode what's happening, how you understand. One of the main issues of stress is when we don't have control over a situation. So think about a situation in your life where something has gone wrong, not the earthquake just at the moment, but think about a situation where there was something outside of your control that happened to you. Can you remember how that felt? That you actually started to feel your levels of stress rise. You get worried about it, don't you? You start to lose control. It might be one of your children is sick, or one of your family members are under pressure. It might be that you haven't got enough finances at the moment, or you don't know what's going to happen because of a storm or whatever. And that starts to impact on our worldview. And when that happens, this is where we can actually start to become quite in danger of having some poor reactions. And I want to explore this a little bit more. So we use these worldviews, and what all of these four things do, the values, the beliefs, the customs, and the institution, what it does is it actually makes us, or we respond by making assumptions. Now, assumptions is something we believe to be true about the world. And when we make an assumption, we actually put a line and say, this is how life works. This is what's going to happen. And this is what we can expect to take place. And we interpret what people are saying, and we try to explain our thoughts, and we attempt to relate to people, and it all comes out of the way we view the world. Now, the problem happens, and interpersonal conflict takes place when two people's worldviews don't align. So we see this all the time in international politics, that one country doesn't get on with another country, and it's often because there's just a misunderstanding. And it happens in families because sometimes we have a different way of viewing things. It might happen in your community because you find someone's from one heritage and someone's from another heritage. Even though you might look the same on the outside, you're different on the inside because we've all got a different worldview, and that's actually okay. So I want us to think about the impact of our worldview. Worldview is really important because it actually changes the way we use our will or our desire. It changes the way we make our choices, and it defines the way we make decisions. So you will make decisions actually based upon your worldview, even though no one has ever told you what your worldview is. You will make decisions based on all of that stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And it's actually it's a good experience and a good exercise and you might want to do this sometime over the next few days, where you just sit down and you say, why am I like the way I am? Okay, what has made me the way I am? What is my worldview? So you might write down where you came from. You might think about your family. You might think about your heritage. You might think about the things you believe. You might think about your spirituality. You might think about your physical, the things you do, work you do, the education you've had. They're all impacting upon your worldview. And that might help you understand a little bit. Our worldview also impacts the use and the range of our emotions. Now, I have a lot of friends who are from different nationalities in Australia, and I always find it interesting how different nationalities respond to pressure. I've got some English friends who, when something bad happens, they're very, very stiff, and they're very, very careful in their response. Oh, that's terrible, might be their response. And then I might have a Greek friend who responds, and the arms go up and the voice comes out and the arms wave, and there's a huge response. And that's a cultural response to the same problem. And so it depends. How do you respond? I don't know how you respond, but you know how you respond. And this is actually a defining impact for us. The way we approach logic and thinking, our motivation towards life, love, and family, all of these things become impacted by our worldview. If our worldview is very cut off from family, then we won't find family very important. I know I worked with a lot of soldiers over many years who were very disconnected from their families. In fact, some joined the army because they wanted to get away from their family. I'll tell you an interesting side story. At Christmas time, I would see an increase in bad behaviour by certain soldiers. Okay, so certain soldiers, as it got to the beginning of December, would start doing things they shouldn't be doing. They would deliberately drink too much, or they might be late to parading in the morning. They might not have their uniform straight, and they were normally very good soldiers. But as it got closer to Christmas, they got worse and worse. And I wondered what was going on, and I worked it out one day. They were wanting to be in jail over Christmas. They wanted to do something bad enough so that they were in jail over Christmas so they didn't have to go home. Because if they were free over Christmas, they knew their family would want them to go home. And so they didn't want to go home, so they'd rather be in jail than go home. So they didn't want to do something that's so bad that it ruined their career, but they wanted to do something bad enough so that they didn't have to go home. Now, you might find that really strange, because you can't imagine not wanting to go home. For me, the times that I've been away from my family at those times were the times I wanted to get home most of all. But that's an assumption in my mind that everyone thinks like that. Not everyone thinks like that. And when a disaster happens, we have to be really careful that we're not just thinking what we would think. Because as Pastor said about the kids going to school, if they're not allowed to go to school, you might expect them to be happy about that, but one might not be happy about that because they're really wanting to go to school. Or they all might be unhappy about it. We don't know, because it's going to be different in the different ways and the different spaces that we find ourselves. So your motivation towards life, love and family is determined by your worldview. how we assign meaning to words, actions, and situations, how we interpret and evaluate someone else's meaning and what they're experiencing, and how we relate to others. So all of these things are impacted by our worldview. They're deeply impacted, and they are significant determiners of what we think. So going back to our bear for a minute, all of this stuff comes in to how and why and what this individual, put yourself in the position of this individual is very, very different. So just look at the person next to you for a moment and say, I'm different to you. Okay, I'm different to you. And you're glad that you're different to each other. Okay, it's a good thing. It'd be terrible if we were all the same, wouldn't it? Are you sure you two are different at the back? You look a little different, but I think could be twins, but that's fine. So there's differences. There's external differences and there's internal differences. There's spiritual differences. There's attitudinal differences. They're all really important. So the way you view the world leads you to make assumptions, or you think certain things are going to happen. So what we need to realise is that when our worldview is shattered, something pretty devastating takes place. So we expect certain things because we're viewing the world a certain way. And when something challenges that, it's actually quite frightening. Now, we're talking about the earthquake. Yes, that's challenged our worldview. But can I say, any experience of grief, loss and trauma will challenge your worldview. Now, Kathy shared a difficult story today of her journey in grief and loss. And at different points along that journey, her worldview was challenged, and if not shattered at points. The things she expected to take place didn't take place, and things she didn't expect to take place took place. And so the thoughts, her spiritual life, she shared that, her own experience and her responses all were impacted by the incredible things that took place. But what I want to look at is what happens to us. So our assumptions are challenged. This is the first thing that takes place. Now, I want you to think for a moment about what that might mean. What assumptions might we make about the world? What assumptions, what decisions, what thoughts do we have that this is actually the truth? What do we think about the world? So think about our bear and what it might think about the world. It might ask the question, or yourself in the living in your house in Port Vila, you might have the assumption that the ground is always going to be stable. Because up till now, the ground has always been stable. You're expecting it to just be there. You're expecting to be able to walk across the room without the floor shaking. That's the assumption. And suddenly, the floor shakes. And so it challenges that assumption. But what that does is it makes us not only confused, it makes us doubt that assumption is correct. And so we start to replay the possibility that could mean something else. Or we start to question our safety. We start to explore the possibility of fear. And we allow that to come forward in us. Another assumption we might make is that God is going to look after me. And that, while that's a great truth, and he is, but we might assume that means that bad things are never going to happen to us. Now, I've been a Christian for over 40 years. I've been a pastor for 37 years. And I would love to say that I've had no pain or no challenges, but it's not true. The reality is life has its moments. Life has its hard moments. Life has its time. And if I go through life with an assumption that God is going to look after me and that means everything is going to be perfect, I am going to be disappointed. And sometimes when a challenge comes, like we heard with Kathy, or we imagine with the earthquake for everyone, it becomes something that challenges that. And you say, well, God didn't look after me in the way I expected him to look after me. And so it can be quite destabilising for people. So one of the things I've heard from people, and not so much directly, I've heard it one step removed, people are asking the question, why did God allow this earthquake to happen? You know, Vanuatu is such a beautiful place. The people are so lovely. They're good people. Why did God allow this to happen? And that question comes out of an assumption that nothing bad is ever going to happen here. And that is probably an unhealthy assumption to have. Now, the fact that God's going to look after us is a good assumption, but the form in which that takes is where we have a problem. And I'd love to talk to anyone about that if you are struggling with that, because we had a good conversation about that last night with a group of people. And there was just this sense that sometimes we take something that is reasonable and we can add some unreasonable expectations to that. We can take it further than we should. Another assumption might be, I'm always going to be able to find work. So let's imagine these three assumptions for the person who has just experienced the earthquake. The ground is always going to be stable. Well, the earthquake proved us wrong. God is going to look after me. Well, I got injured in the earthquake. Or I'm always going to be able to find work. The business that I work in now isn't able to function. It's out of business. It's going to be out of business for 3 months while it's being rebuilt. I don't have my work anymore. I don't have the money to pay my rent. I don't have the money to support my family. And I can have it all shattered by one action. All of my assumptions could be shattered. And you can have hundreds of other assumptions that actually layer upon layer upon layer as we go through. So this is the first thing that can happen when we experience a breaking of our worldview. And remember what I said, a breaking of our worldview can happen because of anything traumatic. It could be an earthquake, but it could also be the loss of somebody, a death. It could be the loss of employment. It could be a sickness. It could be lots of things which actually impact you. The second thing which happens when our worldview is shattered is that our confidence is undermined. Now just think about yourself for a minute. Think about on December the 15th, how confident you felt about life and the future, and think about now. Is there just a little bit of a difference? Just a little less, you might still be positive, but you might feel a little less confident. And so confidence can be shattered, confidence can be undermined by a shattering of a worldview, and we need to be aware of that. Another thing that can happen is that security can get threatened as well. The things that you expect to rely on can suddenly be problematic. So you expect there to be electricity, and there's not. You can expect there to be water running fresh to your house, but it's not. You can expect to be safe in your home, and you might not be. You might not be able to walk through the town centre. You lose your sense of comfort can be impacted in a negative way, and we need to be aware that could be an outcome of a worldview being shattered. It's when that which you expected and relied upon can no longer be trusted. And this is a huge outcome. It's when you thought everything was ordered, everything was sorted out, everything was in the right columns, and everything looked just great. but now they're not. And what you're left with is a sense of confusion, a sense of doubt, and potentially you're experiencing fear as well. And these feelings are very, very invasive. And so for our illustration with our bear, you know, if his life was great, he felt good, he felt everything was going well, but when the worldview gets shattered, when something happens to it, he ends up confused, in doubt, and in fear. Now, he looks exactly the same as he did beforehand, but he's left with a sense of just limitation and problem that is actually taking him away from the person that he's meant to be. All right, so a person gets their worldview shattered. What do they actually need? So what I want you to do now, in just your groups again, I want you to think about if somebody's worldview has been shattered, what do you think they need? Now, don't try and solve their problem, okay? So we're not trying to solve their problem. Just think about what they actually might need from you. If your worldview got shattered, what would you need? What would you like people to do for you or to provide for you? Take a few minutes, talk about it, and then I'll hear from the groups, and then I'll wind this up. Just get into groups of 4 or 5 like you have been.